For a lot of people, top of mind. We know last year some 500,000 people came into the country in the last period, and that is, well, it's certainly quite high. In fact, depending on what numbers you look at, in the year ending 30th September 2023, what period you look at, the population in Australia actually grew by a lot more than that, 659,000 people at a growth rate of 2.5%, the highest in 6 decades. That has people concerned, including Sustainable Population Australia, which is organising a public meeting to be held in Adelaide on this Saturday, 2 to 3:30 at the Regent Room, which is in the Box Factory at 52 Regent Street, Adelaide. In the back streets there near between Halifax Street and Carrington Street, essentially is where it is, between also Hutt and Pulteney, to give you an idea of the 4 streets around it, and smack bang in the middle is the Box Factory down a little side street there. So one of the speakers, Leith Van Onselen, chief economist and co-founder of Macro Business, addressing Australia's immigration and everything shortage, I think is the name of the talk. Leith is on the line. Leith Van Onselen, good morning.
G'day, Matthew. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for your time this morning. So what are the concerns here, apart from the fact too many people, not enough housing? We're looking for people to fill jobs. I suppose on one hand, we're meeting that, you would presume, that criteria.
Yeah, yes and no. So the chief concern is that really for the better part of about 20 years, Australia's run a very, very high population growth / immigration policy. So just to put some numbers around that, in the 60 years following the Second World War, Australia's net overseas migration averaged 90,000 people per year, and it was really within a narrow band of around 90,000. So we had fairly stable immigration levels for about 60 years. And then in the mid-2000s, from 2005, the federal government, in its infinite wisdom, decided to ramp immigration through the roof. So for the following 15 years up to the pandemic, we averaged 220,000 net overseas migration. And then following the pandemic, it's now shot up to just under 550,000 in the last year. And the latest monthly data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, which was released this week, suggests that it hasn't come down from that level and it's still running at turbocharged levels. And the problem with this is, really for the better part of 20 years, our population growth has run well ahead of housing supply, well ahead of infrastructure provision, and well ahead of business investment. And what that's doing, it's basically crush loading our major cities. It's driven up the cost of housing. It's forcing people to live in apartments instead of houses. It's obviously creating rental stress currently, and it's also reduced Australia's productivity because population growth's grown faster than the capital stock, and that's also lowering living standards. So that's really the concern here, that the numbers are just simply too high. And as to your comment about it's filling skills shortages, it actually isn't. The reason why I say that is, again, Australia's population's grown by 8.2 million people this century. That's 44%, absolutely enormous growth. Yet we've got worse skills shortages than ever. And the reason why it doesn't solve the skills shortage problem is because it's really a game of whack-a-mole. You can import workers to fill a shortage in one area, then you just create shortages in other areas because it increases demand. So, for example, if we imported a couple of 100,000 builders to try and relieve the housing shortage, we then create shortages in healthcare, shortages of in a whole bunch of other areas because those couple of 100,000 builders would require those services. So then the solution would be whack-a-mole. Yeah. We'll then bring in a whole bunch of nurses, etc. Then that creates shortages in housing again. So that's really the predicament that Australia's had for the better part of 20 years.
All right. What's the answer? What ideally would you like to see happen? Is it a matter of 0 for 5 years? I mean, what do we do?
No, definitely. Look, I don't think I'm not a zero immigration guy. I don't believe in that at all. But I think, personally, I just think we need to go back to the system we had pre-2005, where we average, lot lower levels, and it needs to be based on quality, not quantity. So the system at the moment, it's mostly unskilled. So we always say Australia's got a high skilled system. That's actually not true. Migrant workers work predominantly in lower skilled professions. They earn below the median wage, and they tend to suffer from higher unemployment. And what we need to do is basically make it a skills-based system. So dramatically increase the salary threshold if you want to come here as a skilled migrant, so that we get higher quality. Also, on the international student route, we need to make sure that they're genuine students. We need to tighten up eligibility there, get the numbers down that way. And really, I mean, personally, I think a number below 120,000 a year would be ideal for Australia. and that would be kind of more sustainable, and it would mean that the population would grow far more slowly. And if it was based on quality, we could actually fill those skill shortages, because you wouldn't be constantly adding to demand without improving the skills in the economy, which is kind of what we're doing at the moment. We're adding to demand in all these areas like housing, etc.
Yeah.
Without bringing in the right skills.
All right. 120,000, still double what it was for decades. Why that number? Why not go back to 60 and leave it at that? Because that was manageable. Is that just too low?
Yeah, well, look. I mean, part of this is a bit of political economy stuff. So it actually averaged 90,000 for 60 years. I'm acknowledging that we have increased the humanitarian intake to 20,000. So it used to be a lot lower than that. I suspect that it would be politically hard and also maybe socially irresponsible to cut that even more. So my 120,000 includes the humanitarian intake, which is measured separately. The other thing also is we are actually going to have an acceleration of deaths now, because the baby boomer generation is coming to an end. I mean, not yet, obviously, but over the next couple of decades, they're going to basically die off, and that's a bulge of population. So we will actually have an acceleration of deaths. So we can probably run immigration a bit higher than we did in that 60 years post-World War II, because we're going to have acceleration of deaths, and we without growing the population by too much.
Look, what you're saying makes absolute sense, ultimately. Is the government listening, do you think?
No, they're not. Unfortunately, the government got at the moment, if anything, is they're not. They've obviously ramped numbers up to a record high. It was deliberate, despite what they say. They deliberately did this because they ran the Jobs and Skills Summit in September 2022 with the express purpose of ramming up immigration, and that's exactly what we've gotten. And it's also why we have an unprecedented rental crisis at the moment, because they ramped up the numbers at the same time as the housing supply. Across the economy, the housing supply system was bottlenecked because of the pandemic. So we've had a huge increase in materials costs. We've obviously got high interest rates. We've got builders going broke left, right, and centre. And now builders are competing with state government infrastructure projects, so they don't have enough labour. And that's basically created the predicament we're in. We've got massive demand with less supply, means the rental crisis that we're all suffering.
It's just, you can't understand why they would make a decision then to ramp up the population growth, the immigration numbers, at a time when we knew we had building supply issues. We knew this during COVID. Material was hard to come by, that everything was running behind schedule, that, you embarked on a build at the start of COVID. Well, you're probably still waiting to this very day for your project to be finished. We knew all this, yet we still ramped up numbers. It's incomprehensible.
It is absolute policy failure by the federal government, unfortunately. So, and it also comes because the Albanese government, before the election, Albo was quoted multiple times in the media, just before, a couple of months before the election, saying that he'd run a lower immigration policy once he was elected. And instead, as soon as he was elected, he was ramped it up to record levels. So he lied to us on that one. And basically, this is a Albo-induced housing disaster. It's as simple as that. He's ramped up demand to record levels at the same time as the supply side's broken because of the pandemic and because we've got high interest rates and high materials costs, and builders obviously competing for labour with infrastructure projects, etc. So, look, it's an absolute disaster. Ultimately, the migration system needs to be run at a level that is below the nation's capacity to build homes, infrastructure, and business investment. It also needs to be in keeping with the natural environment and also water supplies. And I'd argue on all those metrics, it's the numbers are simply far too high. It's grown beyond infrastructure. It's grown beyond our housing supply capacity. And while we've got wet conditions at the moment, the forecasts are for water to become in shortage as well. So adding more people to that dilemma is not very smart either. So it's just an absolute policy failure by the federal government. And to be fair, it's happened over several decades under both parties, but it's just worse at the moment.
Yeah, you've talked in just a few minutes back about making sure international students who come here are real students. And we've seen that in the past where people come in on a student visa and end up working in an Uber, for instance. And I'm sure there are examples similar across the board. But is that up to universities to ensure the students are ridgy-dig, legitimate? And who else? Is it migration department that has to look at that? What happens there?
Well, I'd say it's all of them, but it's really the government because let's face it, the universities behave like profit maximising corporations these days. Like the whole notion that they're there for the public good has just gone out the window. So obviously they're always going to want to run as bigger numbers as they can to maximise revenue, so their vice chancellors can earn their $1 million plus salaries, and all the senior staff can get paid oodles of money. they're basically like profit maximising private corporations these days. So it is really up to the government to drop the hammer on them and to say, to basically ramp up the financial requirements to come here. So they must have big savings if they want to come here. So they don't just come here to work, which is what's happening at the moment. They've also got to lift teaching standards so that, none of this group assignment rubbish where they come in and paired with a local student to basically do the work for them, because that's what's been happening. And also we need to also cut back the amount of hours they can work while they're here, so they don't come here for work, because Labor has also increased that number. It was 20 hours per week pre-pandemic. Now it's 24 hours per week. We know there's a lot of underhand, off the table working as well.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of things they need to do there. They need to raise English language proficiency. They need to make the testing more rigorous, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And, unfortunately, you can't rely on the universities to do the right thing, because, again, it's in their interest to keep numbers as high as possible because they profit from that.
All right. Leith, enjoy
and also, sorry,
yeah.
Can I just add one last thing?
Sure.
We also need to make sure that universities also provide housing on campus for their students in proportion to their enrolments, because at the moment, those students just go to the private rental market and then create problems for the broader rental market. So if the universities want to grow their numbers, they should provide on-campus student accommodation in proportion to those numbers.
Well, that's more building then, isn't it? And we don't have enough of those at the moment, as we've been discussing. Look, thank you for your time this morning. You'll be addressing those issues along with a couple of other speakers at the Box Factory in the city, in Regent Street. It runs off Halifax Street, just east of Pulteney Street, and this will be on at 2 to 3:30 this coming Saturday, put on by Sustainable Population Australia. Leith Van Onselen, thank you for your time.
Yeah, cheers, Matthew. Anytime.
Thank you. And Leith is the CEO and co-founder of Macro Business, who will be here addressing migration and the everything shortage that is currently happening in Australia. Chief economist, I should say, of Macro Business. You'll be able to hear him at the Box Factory this coming Saturday afternoon.